Good evening and welcome to the Dusty Feet. We're having some fun here. I've been playing with audio and we're going to try an audio source in tonight and hopefully we'll see how it works. Um, that'll be the fun of being live in the Dusty Feet, right? So uh, remember to get the series, go to TheDustyFeet.com. There's a page on the Matthew series. There's pages there's links, menu items for these, and also on Vimeo.com/TheDustyFeet, and you'll have all the information you want, and the Dusty Feet will have all the latest and greatest um, info on what's coming up next and that kind of stuff. My brother and I are actually going to get together this weekend and talk about our plans for some Red String and that Renew series we were talking about. So we're gonna maybe put a little more pen to paper, so to speak, on some ideas and plans. Looking forward to that. Tonight, part 3 of Branch of the Vine homework series, right? Jesus and the Torah. This is, one episode. We're at 3 parts. There's going to be 4. Just might as well get that out of the way now, right? But so tonight's part 3. We'll cover some stuff. Tonight will be fun because I want to stretch your thinking and think about things that are sometimes ancillary, tied on to things that are one of those fun things to do. So, and as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God, interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other, here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go on the Dusty Feet. Good thing the intro came up because I needed to cough, right? So that's a good one. Take a drink. Okay. Part 6, or episode 6 of Mackie's Matthew series, part 3 for us. I want us to think about paradigms. Okay. What I want us to think about is when things don't fit. Okay. Paradigms, right? Those are things that we believe based on what we've been taught, cultural context, reading something, right? And so this is what it is, okay? And maybe sometimes since we don't know anything other than that, that's the only thing we have to put in this box, okay? And I'd like us to see if maybe we can stretch that box, maybe break the box up. That's a thought. As we look at some of these things, and when we hear certain things, we want to figure out, how do they fit in this box? In other words, I have a box, I have this thing, and I had this new information. I said, I love this new information. I love it. Let's put it in the box, but it doesn't fit. And so, what do? Often we tend to ignore them. We tend to brush it to the side. We tend to do lots of things other than figure out why that doesn't fit. Sometimes we'll call it a paradox. From the paradigm, we'll call it a paradox because it doesn't fit in our box. So it's a paradox because it doesn't fit in our box. I go, well, maybe the box shouldn't be there. And then that paradox might shift our paradigm. And so there's a different understanding, and then we see how that works. That's some fun stuff to think about when we go here. Let's keep in the back of our minds. Let's play the first Mackie video, and then we'll chat. So let's listen to the first one.
So at this moment of the story, you think clearly if Yahweh has a sane bone in his body, that's a bad metaphor. Whatever, if he's a clear, rational thinker, he's going to call his losses, and just walk away. precisely what he doesn't do. Israel has walked away. Yahweh will not walk away from his promises. And so Jeremiah, one of the great prophets, Israel's sitting in exile in Babylon, and these are his words to that generation of the people. He says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt." Yeah, they broke that covenant. "Even though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord." So the emphasis here is that they're the ones who walked away. The covenant's broken, not because Yahweh was unfaithful, but because they were. But that doesn't mean the whole story is off. There's a new covenant coming, and it will be different. It will be distinct. So you had the 10 Commandments, and then the 603 after that, and those were the specific terms of the agreement for Yahweh and ancient Israel. Now, that didn't work. And it didn't work not because they're bad. It didn't work because Israel was unfaithful. And so what Yahweh's going to do, he's going to bring about the creation of a new relationship with his people, but it'll be different. It'll be different. And that's the covenant. Here's the covenant I will make with the people at that time. I'm going to put my Torah in their minds. I'm going to write the Torah on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they need to teach their neighbor or say to one another, "Hey, you should know the Lord," because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. Now let's stop, but let's keep this up here. So this is a new and distinct covenant, and the terms of the relationship will be different. But are we doing away with Torah and the commands? No, but their role is changing. Because it's not about them being written in a code that you obey. It's about God doing something to embed and internalize his will on the hearts of his people. And that embedding of the motivation and the desire and the knowledge of how to live as a human before God, it's an expression of relationship. Do you see this? I will be their God and they'll be my people. They'll know what to do. Because there'll be a degree of closeness and connection that will make obedience no longer a duty, but a joy and an expression of what's actually deep inside of us. Do you see what he's saying here? He's talking about the renovation of the human heart. You don't have to compel obedience. What I'm going to do is something that will make obedience become natural. And what is that thing? How on earth? Holy cow. How on earth do you do something like that? You get somebody to that kind of place. And it's the last sentence right here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more.
Okay, so there's a bit to unpack there. So let's just kind of dabble on this, okay? Because there's some fun stuff in there that I think would be fun to challenge our thinking, okay? So I want to take us to, he mentioned that the covenant. So this is again, it's mentioned in this many times as an analogy. This is a marriage covenant. These are vows given. These are marriage covenant pieces. Okay, and I want us to think about this in that vein. Okay, and how this works, because like he said, the bride broke the vows, not the groom, right? In other words, God didn't break his vows, that Israel did. Okay. So for fun, I said, so let's look at what the vows, the commitment were, and are. Okay. So I said, hey, wait a minute. We do have marriage vows now. So let's look at our marriage vows. So the most common that most people that I know are, let's be fair, right? It's not to the globe. Most of the people that I know are most familiar with what we'll call them the Protestant vows. Okay. And that's what they title them. So it says, in the name of God, I blank take blank to be my husband or wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. This is my solemn vow. Okay. And you go, okay, those are vows for a marriage relationship. So does that explain how to live a marriage relationship? Does that say, there you go, you said the vows are it? I hope not. Because it goes until death do you part. Well, okay, if I kill you, then we're cool, right? Because then I don't have to worry about that. That's going to go. Because the other side isn't there, you know. What does for better, for worse? To love and to cherish. What does that look like? Because we get people that argue all the time. We get irreconcilable differences. We've gone past a certain point. There's more to it than just the vow. There has to be something beyond that that takes us in that vein. Okay, so I said, okay, let's look at the Jewish vows for fun. So Jewish vows. It said that this one thing: I am my beloved, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And then this 7-part prayer is right afterwards. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. Gladden the beloved companions as you gladdened your creatures in the Garden of Eden. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gladdens this couple. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who created joy and gladness, loving couples, mirth, glad song, pleasure, delight, love, loving communities, peace, and companionship. Adonai, our God, let there soon be heard the voice of the loving couple, the sound of their jubilance from their canopies, and of the youths from their song-filled feasts. Blessed are you who causes the couple to rejoice, one with the other. We bless God for creating joy and happiness, bride and groom, mirth and song, gladness and rejoicing, love and harmony, peace and companionship. And we thank God for letting this bride and groom to rejoice together. Well, first of all, I like those much better than I like our Protestant vows. That's for sure. But again, what does that look like? There's still a lot in the vows, and in this one, there's a lot of acknowledgement that God has a very strong part in this relationship, that the blessing comes from Him, and then may that blessing be bestowed on the couple, and them, and the relation to their community, which is an important part of that. You've heard that adage that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think healthily that's very true. And I think we see that today in the fact that we have problems because villages don't do that anymore. Communities don't watch out for each other anymore. It just doesn't work that way, at least in our Western culture, especially, sadly enough. Okay. And then I went, okay, so we have this covenant and we have the vows of that covenant that God has with his people at the foot of Mount Sinai. So that is found in Exodus chapter 19, okay, verses 1 through 8. Okay, so let's read that. Okay, here we go. In the 3rd moon, after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Mitzrayim, that would be Egypt, on this day they came to the wilderness of Sinai, for they set out from Rephidim and have come to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to Elohim, and Yahovah called to him from the mountain, saying, This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and declare to the children of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And now If you diligently obey my voice and shall guard my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession above all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a reign of priests and a set apart nation. Those are the words which you are to speak to the children of Israel. So Moshe came back and called for the elders of the people and set before them all these words that God commanded him. And all the people answered and said, all that Yahweh has spoken, we shall do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to Yahweh. So he says, this is the vow. That's the vow. Okay? That's the vow. In other words, they say, are you married? And the I do. The we will. And there's a really good, I've heard this broken out in these pieces as it's said in the prayers, we will, we will, we will. Okay? And it's a wonderful thing to hear. Okay? So you have you have this vow and you go, okay, what is that? Okay, so what were the parts to that? Right after this, they made the vow, did the peace. Then Moses goes up and comes back with the 10 words. Okay, comes back with what we call the 10 commandments, the 10 words. He comes down the mountain, and here's the 10 words. We know there's more to the story than that first trip. There's a second trip. But he goes up to get these instructions now. Said, okay, we're going to follow you, God. We're going to do your ways. We're all saying, yes, we're going to do your ways. Okay. That only means you're agreeing to do his ways. Now he's going to tell you what those ways are. And he goes and lays all those pieces out. So here's the question that we have is, because we've heard in common to lay a very broad stroke statement. I call it churchanity. Okay. Churchanity's phrase is the law is done away with. Matter of fact, if you're doing them, you're being legalistic. It's bad. You're dishonoring something and all this stuff. And I go, I have problems with that because scripture has problems with that. So if there's a paradigm, or worse yet, where there's a paradigm and you have this piece and you go, well, mine, that doesn't fit in here to do those things. Therefore, they're wrong. They don't fit in the box. Don't apply, blah, blah, blah. And I think we need to look at that. So one of the things that you ask is that people go, well, the law was that they could never have upheld the law anyways. So how could they do that? And so I would go, okay, so God's doomed them for failure by giving them something that they can't do, right? There's no way that they can do it. Okay. Does scripture say anything different to that? Specifically, does God say anything different to that? So we go from Exodus 19, and we're going to fast forward 40 years. We're at 40 years, okay? In that time, we've had a bunch go on. We have an entire generation, everybody from age 20 and up. Age 20 and up are dead, except for, by the time we get to the text in Deuteronomy, okay? Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30. We're going to get there. Everybody's dead but 3 people. Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. All the rest are dead. Okay? They've heard the stories. There were those that were children or under the age of 20 coming out of Egypt. Okay? But there's all those parents, all those people, all dead. So now in Deuteronomy, he's going over the things again. He says, okay, let's go back. Let's renew what we're going to go. You were married many years ago. and you've had the rough ups and downs, and you've had a bunch go on, and you've had so much kids have come and gone, grandkids, there a lot. And now you come to this time, 40 years later, where you're going to renew your vows, renew your commitment. Maybe it's because you're entering a new phase. Maybe the empty nest is gone, the house is finally clear, and you're like, we're in a new phase in life. We're going to get this start with Israel. It's a fresh start, and we're going to renew the vows. But we're going to go over, does that mean that the original vows are null and void, that they don't matter, that we're just going to overwrite? And I'd say, no. If anything, I can now go back and actually emphasize those points of the vows that maybe I need to be better at. And maybe some other points of vows where you can say, this was good and may it continue, right? And you get this opportunity to do this, okay? So we get to Deuteronomy Chapter 30. Now, I want to do something different a little bit. I want you to hear Chapter 30. And the reason I want you to think about this is a little paradigm shift thing. This is the only way that they heard this story for hundreds of years, probably near 1,000 years, that the average person, they didn't have their own Torah scrolls. They didn't have their own copies. They didn't do those kind of things. And what they had to talk about were really only the first 5. And that's it. The other ones were prophets that were well down the road, and those weren't done. They were talk about words that were said live when they talked about them, but written much later. David in his writings going to be well past his kingship and the kings before those trickle down and get out to the general public. So it's really just this Torah scenario. And they're heard, and they're probably heard, and I don't know if traditionally, they have Torah broken up into once a week breakout. So you covered the entire Torah in a year. So every year you get a fresh start. I wonder if this is where it started from. I wonder if one of those where you can take that back that far, where that particular thing is reiterated. Okay, it's almost like reading the vows again, especially when you get to Deuteronomy. But I want you to listen to 30 and just sit back and listen to the words. And then we'll point out a couple of verses that I say might also make some paradigm challenges with you based on what 30 says. So let's go listen to 30 and see what it brings us.
Chapter 30. And it shall be, when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse that I have set before you, that your heart shall turn back among all the nations to which the Lord your God will make you stray. And you shall turn back to the Lord your God, and heed his voice as all that I charge you today, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your being. And the Lord your God shall turn back your former state, and have mercy upon you. And he shall turn back and gather you in from all the peoples to which the Lord your God has scattered you. Should your strayed one be at the edge of the heavens, from there shall the Lord your God gather you in, and from there shall he take you. And the Lord your God shall bring you to the land that your fathers took hold of, and you shall take hold of it. And he shall do well with you, and make you more multitudinous than your fathers. And the Lord your God shall circumcise your heart, and the heart of your seed, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your being for your life's sake. And the Lord your God shall set all these imprecations upon your enemies and your foes who pursued you. And you shall turn back and heed the Lord's voice, and you shall do all his commands which I charge you today. And the Lord your God shall give you an extra measure for the good in all your handiwork, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your beasts, and in the fruit of your soil. For the Lord shall turn back to exult over you for good, as he exulted over your fathers, when you heed the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commands and his statutes written in this book of teaching. When you turn back to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your being. For this command which I charge you today is not too wondrous for you, nor is it distant. It is not in the heavens to say, Who will go up for us to the heavens and take it for us, and let us hear it, that we may do it? And it is not beyond the sea to say, Who will cross over for us beyond the sea and take it for us, and let us hear it, that we may do it? But the word is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to do it. See, I have set before you today life and good, and death and evil, that I charge you today to love the Lord your God, to go in his ways, and to keep his commands and his statutes and his laws. And you shall live and multiply. And the Lord your God shall bless you in the land into which you are coming to take hold of it. And if your heart turns away, and you do not listen, and you go astray, and bow to other gods and worship them, I tell you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not long endure on the soil to which you are about to cross the Jordan, to come there to take hold of it. I call to witness for you today the heavens and the earth. Life and death I set before you, the blessing and the curse, and you shall choose life so that you may live, you and your seed. To love the Lord your God, to heed his voice, and to cling to him, for he is your life and your length of days, to dwell on the soil which the Lord your God swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of, like, if you wondered what Israel, you wonder what, see, I don't know, I want to say this right. I've said it before. We are them, they are us. Right? The words, don't think that there's something that we wouldn't do because we are doing what they did. Okay. So if you think you're above or beyond or doesn't apply, I think you have a very strange thought process, because we're doing the same thing. And Mackie's going to get to this in a roundabout way when we talk about this. And I love it, especially in this second part where we're going to get to. But the one of the points was like verse 6. Okay. So verse 6 says, And Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, that you might live. Okay. And you go, I thought circumcision of the heart was a New Testament thing. I thought that's what they mentioned in the New Testament. So that's a New Testament thing, circumcision of the heart versus circumcision. And you go, okay. Mackie's mentioned often the phrase, no, not he's mentioned often. I've said it because he said it in another text. That's right. I'm hearing it often. You're not hearing it often. So I'm going to go back and say it again. Glowing hyperlinks. When they hear something, it takes them back to here. Okay? When they hear circumcision of the heart, the Hebrew that's grown up in it, this is where they go back to. This is where they hear. The hyperlink takes you there. In a Schofield Bible, there's one of the benefits of the Schofield Bible is that there's cross-reference texts on the side and the columns. They have a text in, and then the side, and they'll have the verses and the various points that point to various verses. I don't even think they're all inclusive, to tell the honest truth. I think that's one thing that a software package that I'm writing is trying to get to the topic scenarios. And I think I want to drive it on a hyperlink idea where I click on it and it'll take you to these various points that are going to stand out. It said these are all together. They're a unified story. The hyperlinks just connect the dots, okay, that bring you back to say, what does this story and this story have in common? I was listening to a Zoom meeting with Rabbi David Foreman, and it was covering Jeremiah. And he started to break out the parallels in the story between Jeremiah and Joseph. Jeremiah and Joseph. Now, normally in your head, you probably are not thinking, oh, yeah, I know the connection between Jeremiah and Joseph. Yeah, they're both Jews. Well, no. Actually, the more I listened and the more I learned, the more my jaw dropped. And then I realized a bunch of it is, again, the Hebrew. It's in the verbiage, the words, okay, and I'll call them the hyperlinks. Dot 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 dot, and they'll go, "We've heard this phrase before. We've heard this before," and you go, "Okay, but is that it?" So you start looking for all the other pieces that go with it, and you realize, this is interesting to see those connections. It's the same thing that's going on in Yeshua's time. And when the Jews are hearing it, this is his target audience. This is who Jesus is talking to. He's talking to these guys. This is where it's going to click. What you have is, and Mackie talks about this, you have a rabbi, Jesus. He's teaching them, and he's teaching them something different than some of the other rabbis are going. They have become very entrenched in their ways and very entrenched in certain sages of the past and those kind of deals. Not that they're bad, it's that they're entrenched in this thought process. And he's going, I need to get you to stretch yourself past that thought process. I need to reconnect some of the things that have lost connection. To reconnect those things that have lost connection. And we'll get into where he's going to take that with Torah and the expectation that goes from murder to hate. Okay. And here we already have points of circumcision of your heart. He's going to write it on your hearts. And he talks about, and if you go follow other ones, you know what's funny? It doesn't say, and abandon my Torah, right? What's it say? If you go follow other mighty ones. What it was adultery. It was, you're not honoring God with all your heart, soul, and mind. You're giving your loyalty to somebody else. Adultery to God, breaking of the vows. That's what does it. And that's where he said, that is going to cause a break in the relationship. We're going to have to rebuild this relationship. I will do that. And it says he will. This is what's going to happen. This is interesting. If they got that when they heard it, did they go like, what do you mean we're not going to, what do you mean we're going to break, what do you mean captivity? And then I'm going to bring you back out of the nations. They're not even a nation yet. They haven't been put together yet. They're still a nomadic people sitting on the cusp of the land again and getting somewhere. And you hear this, and this is what Moses has written and said back. It's interesting discussions to figure out how they would take it, how Moses took it, and how that would have been, because we need to stretch ourselves in our thinking of those kind of things. So stretch yourselves a little bit. Now here's one of the biggies. Okay, they can't do Torah. You can't do it. That you're legalistic. You can't and they can never do. So you're saying God set them up for failure. That He gave them something that they couldn't do. Okay, and I'd go, okay, did God say anything about that? Let's go to Deuteronomy 30, verse 13. Okay, just for fun again. And let's go with and I'll start with verse 11. We'll kind of roll into it. For this command which I'm commanding you today, this is not too hard for you, nor is it far off. It is not in the heavens to say, who shall ascend to the heavens for us and to bring it to us, and to cause us to hear it, so that we do it? Nor is it beyond the sea to say, who shall go over the sea for us and to bring it to us, and cause us to hear it, or shall we do it? For the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth, and it's in your heart to do it. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I'm commanding you today to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to guard his commands and his laws and his right rulings, that you shall live and increase, and Yahweh your Elohim shall bless you in the land which you go to possess. So if you're saying that they were too hard and couldn't be done, and you can't do them, and you shouldn't do them to dishonor, it dishonors Jesus to do this, I think you're going to have a challenge with Deuteronomy 30. Okay. And that's that paradigm where we got to break it out because it doesn't fit. We'll get into a whole paradox blow off later. But that's something you really, really, really have to think about when you're saying this. I will be one to tell you that I will agree that in that the context of those commandments, that there's a bunch of it that very much fits the context of the land. Okay, very much fits the context of the land. If you build your house and it's got a flat roof, then you need to put parapets. You need to put railings on the side so people don't fall off. You need to be that concerned with people and safety that you make sure that there's something to protect them so they don't fall off and hurt themselves. Okay, so in that particular deal, so he says nothing about railings on steps. There's nothing about handrails on steps. Doesn't say anything about lots of things. What do you do if it's not your roof? What do you do if it's just a big, tall structure? It's not your roof of your house. So do I not have to do it there? And you go, interesting. Maybe it means more than that. Maybe I need to be that much care for my neighbor and my community to do that. There's the heart thing, as we're going to get into, and that's where we see Jesus bringing them back to. He brings them back to the heart scenario. Mackie mentioned something later. He talks about music. And when you start with music, you start with, in theory, if you go to school, right? You go to school and learn music or art, you might there might be some classroom first to explain things. For instance, with art, it would be color wheels. You would learn the color laws, that there's 3 primary colors, secondary colors, tertiary colors, and it just expands from there to 16 billion colors, right? But they're all from red, blue, and yellow, right? Your 3 primary colors. And there you're going to get in density. Now, what's interesting is then there's light theory. You mix those 3 colors together in light and you get white. In color, you mix them together in enough density with solid medium, you'll get black. So all of the colors together make black. None of the colors in light together make black. That's the book side. Then you learn the practical side. I was a hair designer for a number of years, and you mix your colors together and you realize that you're not painting a white canvas, that the canvas you're going to be putting it on is going to be a different color. So when I put this on top of that canvas, what's going to happen when I mix those 2 colors together? What happened was people would not pay attention in class, or they would not read the instructions at best, and they'd forget that they were not putting it on a white canvas. They were putting it on something else. And so the color that they thought they were going to get didn't work. And they wondered why. And they said, it's color science. It's color theory. This is how color works. You didn't pay attention to the instructions. I had a very profitable career correcting other people's color because I took the time to learn and understand color theory in this. Do I understand music? Not a lick. Okay. My brother, Jimmy, very much so. He and a buddy, Jim Achilles, actually did the music together. Achilles is a brilliant musician. It comes from his dad's line of musician. My dad not so much a musician. Jimmy got all of that, and then some, and it's wonderful to hear. But you understand from there, from the classroom, then it goes to scales, and you learn the scales. Play the piano, play guitar, play anything. Then you're gonna learn the scales. Bum 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 bum, and you learn scales. And then from scales, you go to music. Maybe, maybe, maybe Jesus comes along and says, "You got the written, you've worked the scales. Now it's time to make serious music. Now it's time to make serious music. You're not infants anymore. You're not the children just coming out of Sinai. You've been through the ringer. You've had the land. You're in exile. The people he's talking to are under occupation." He says, "But now it's time to make some serious music. And with that, let's remember what our instructions are. Let's remember how we do this, and then let's take it to the next. How to be creative." If I wasn't worried about some copyright things, there's some other stuff I'd love to play that would show you guys that are playing instruments. And you go, "But that's not the way you normally play it." So I get it. But once they understand what you can do, then they play it differently. Maybe I'll work on that for next week and show some clips. That'd be cool. We'll start off with that. Then we'll move on. But maybe Jesus is taking this to this instead of, it's not a piece. And we'll get to the Jeremiah piece and the context he's going to get. So with that said, now let's watch video 2. Then we'll wrap in the Jeremiah context and a question I want to ask us about the context that Mackie seems to be inferring. So I'm asking the question and see, is it really that? And then we can talk about it. So let's watch video 2, and then we'll talk some more after that.
Now, this is profound, but it's also really practical. So just think of your own life. Think of a situation where you really blew it with someone else, right? You wronged them, you did something, you really let them down, you hurt them, whatever. Just get that story in your mind when you did that. And if you have to work really hard, it's a clue that you're not that self-aware. Just a little hunch right there. Or that your friends are never honest with you, right? About how you really treat them. So get that story in your head, right? Because we all have one of those stories. Now, what happens next, we may not have all experienced. But some of us will have. With that person, we hurt them, and they work through it, right? It's lame, but they work through it, and they get to a place where they actually come towards us, and they forgive, right? I name it, I own what I did, and they don't have to do this. In fact, I may not even deserve this, but they forgive me. They forgive me. They take it, we let it go, and we work through it. Something changes. Something deep changes in the relationship when that happens. You guys with me? And if you've experienced that before, you know what I'm talking about. Because all of a sudden that relationship has this bond that is stronger than just friendship or nature. And part of it is actually a really unnatural act to do that with somebody. You know, like alpha male chimpanzees. My wife and I are watching this great documentary series on wildlife in India right now. There are so many monkeys in India. Oh my gosh, I had no idea how many different species of monkeys there are in India. And so like alpha male, chimps or whatever, like when they have conflict, they don't forgive each other. They bash each other's heads in. Like that's what we do naturally. That's nature. To forgive is unnatural in a way. And it's a unique relational repair and bond that human beings do. And something happens there. And if you've ever been forgiven by someone when you totally wronged them, you know the change that takes place. All of a sudden, how you think about that person, and you're wanting to do right by them, and you're wanting to honor them, it changes. And the motivation for doing that changes towards them. It's just this gratefulness and this care because of this crazy thing that person did for you. That's what Jeremiah's talking about here. God's going to move towards his people, in such a great act of forgiveness that all of a sudden the demands of the Torah won't be like what you have to obey. It's going to internalize it in a renovation of the heart that's so deep that obedience to Yahweh begins to come naturally. That's what Jeremiah's talking about. And it's going to happen through a great act of forgiveness, God moving towards his people. So this promise just stands there in the Hebrew Scriptures. The rest of Israelite history prayed out, and that covenant was not realized. And that promise is connected to all kinds of other promises in the prophets and so on. Jesus comes onto the scene, and these are precisely the promises that he sees himself picking up and bringing into reality. Jesus sees himself forming the Jeremiah 31 people, the people of the new covenant. He said so. At his Last Supper, he took the wine, and the bread, and he said, this cup is what? He says, it's the new covenant in my blood. What Jesus sees himself doing is actually enacting God's forgiveness. He's not going to wait for tax collectors and sex workers to come, repent, offer sacrifices in the temple. He's going to go to them. It's this preemptive strike of grace on God's part that Jesus is enacting. And so these parties that he's throwing for these people, these tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners, they know what Jesus is about. It's no secret. He's not compromising. He's calling them to repent and to follow him. But the way that he moves towards them and the way that he loves them and respects them, it draws these people to him. And all of a sudden, these people begin to notice their desire to obey the God of Israel as they follow Jesus. It starts to mess with their minds and with their hearts. Okay, now we're talking. We're talking here. We're talking about the renovation of the heart. And that's what Jesus sees himself as doing.
That's what Jesus sees himself as doing. I like this. So he starts this out. Mackie does, and he says, Tim made the statement that the covenant was not realized. And I go, okay, was that true? In other words, a life lived in marriage, a life lived through this. Is the covenant a single day? Is it a 1 year, 10 year, 20 year? Or is it not till you're both dead? Okay. Now, what point is not realized? In other words, we just read in Deuteronomy where he goes, well, here's the scoop and the covenant, and here's the piece, and you said yes. And if you don't, this is what's going to happen. So it's an interesting choice of word, and maybe it's a semantics thing for me. But it's one of those things that stretches a bit and go, actually, I think God did everything that he said he was going to do, and he promised you. There were no surprises. There were no surprises. That's a thinker. Because you go, you knew what was coming. He says, I told you, if you went after other mighty ones, that was going to be the backbreaker. And when it does, all the rest. You don't do this, don't do this. Your crops might not do so well because you're not going to do this, you don't do this. You have the best chance if you do my ways. If you go and plant the way you plant and take your seed and then give it a rest every 7 years, don't reap. Let the land rest. Go back and start it again. Plant your trees, do your stuff, and those cycles that go. Okay? The land will prosper. I have heard, I'll state that, I have heard that there are people, farmers, that have tried this particular setup where they've actually tried to work the land scripturally. And their lands flourished. Part of it's what God would say is the science behind it that he created, that the land really does enjoy that kind of rest and use and what you do and all those pieces. And it works for the land. Is it profitable for the farmer to take off? That's what's hard. And we go in our today's society where we want bigger, right? We want our corn husk to be bigger, yada, yada, bigger and bolder and more. More. That's why we have genetically enhanced things to make them bigger, to make more, to handle these things. And God says, don't do that. Follow my ways, do his peace. And we see that. So I want to think about that. Now, one of the things I want to question is the way he read Jeremiah. Go back and read it. Okay. Jeremiah 31 through 34. And where it says, they will no longer teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know Yahweh, for they shall know me from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares God, for I shall forgive the crookedness and remember their sins no more. Remember, that was the end. It was in 34. And I see Jesus beginning that in this step, but like the other one, we're not there. Okay, if you think that we are at this stage now, where God puts it on our hearts and we obey him, do you really think that's what we're doing now? Be honest with ourselves and say, I don't think so. Is it going to be that way? God says it will be that way with the people that he has a covenant relationship with. That's what Deuteronomy said. If you follow my ways, you have my covenant relationship. This is what comes with it. Jeremiah, if you follow my ways, I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. I shall be their Elohim and they shall be my people. This is the covenant I made with the house of Israel after those days. Okay. So God's saying is, what's he going to put in your heart? He can only be talking about these. Jeremiah can only be talking about these. So if Jesus is pointing back to Jeremiah, then it has to be that. Because you can't say, well, it's kind of like that, but it's not. It's kind of like that, but it's not. Those things, well, that's legalism and we don't do that anymore. Or those really don't matter now because I died and so none of that matters anymore. And yet his kingdom build says everything about that. So this is a challenge, and it's a paradigm because you got a box that doesn't fit in. You got a box. There's a good chance that doesn't fit in. And so you go, well, now we have a problem. And I go, if you take the box away, does this really cause a challenge? I don't think so. It boils down to the phrase I said, episode 1 of this series. I just don't want to. I just don't want to. And that's what Israel did. The exact same thing. The terms are to obey the Torah. The interpretation, how to work it out, will not be taught to you. You'll understand it. And when he said, obedience is no longer a duty, but a joy. I love that phrase. What does that mean? Compelling versus natural. In other words, it's going to be instinctive in your heart to do that. Okay, I know it's not that way now because our hearts don't tend to be that way. So you know that this isn't realized yet. So Jeremiah has not happened yet. Did Jesus start it? Did he say it's time to do this to reference the Jeremiah? Yeah. And go back and start this. Let's get back to my ways. Okay. And then you go back to Deuteronomy and it says, oh, and remember, hyperlink, right? We go from Matthew to Jeremiah to Deuteronomy. And it says, oh, by the way, they're not so far off and they're not so high up that you can't do them. You can do them because I built you that way. I created you that way. I put it in your mind and put it in your heart. I created you that way. I think our choice is, I don't want to. And that's a tough one. And then just to wrap this up for fun, okay? he mentions he has the forgiveness episode, which talks about the monkeys and forgiveness not being natural. And I'll vote that it's not natural. I won't vote that we can't, because if we're created in God's image, that's what God does. So again, it's we don't want to. What I really enjoyed about his story in that was that he took it from, when's the last time that you wronged somebody? Okay. And when you hear something like this talked about, people always flip it the other way, that you've been wronged, so you can do this. It's like he flips it on you and says, when you've wronged somebody. And it makes you think differently, because now you're not going the, well, a friend of mine did this. No. When did you do that to somebody else? And I loved his honesty. He said, if you have to think too long about that, either one, you're fooling yourself, or the family and friends you have around you aren't honest with you, which is probably a bit of both. But there's the beep. So, in that forgiveness realm, and we get into this part, and we go, how important is that forgiveness? We know that God said, I will forgive their sins. Now, that's another interesting conundrum that you have. I thought Jesus died to forgive our sins. And God says, I'm going to forgive their sins. So the sins forgiveness parts, he already said he's going to do. And that hasn't happened. And that's a promise. And it doesn't say with some other caveat that's tied to it. He said, that's what I'm going to do. So obviously we have something else we need to think about, which challenges another paradigm, maybe even a paradox, but definitely a paradigm box shift, because that's exactly what it says. So we need to rethink that particular thought process as we go through these pieces. But the forgiveness part, and how important is forgiveness? One, that we need to understand it, so that one, we can feel it from God, because he said, once that's, and I forgive in the heart, I've taken that weight of something, saying, how can you, I've wronged you, God, how can you take me? And you go, I've forgiven you. Okay. And you go, that's great. But God says, but I expect you to practice that. I expect that to be part of your life. This is just more, it's part of your life. And you go, well, how's forgiveness part of my life? And I want us to go to, and we're going to skip ahead a chapter, because we're going to get, so I'm taking us one step in the future, right? But in the chapter, I want us to read this. I think some of you are familiar with this. This then is the way you should pray. Our Father who is in the heavens, let your name be set apart. Let your reign come. Let your desire be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Do not lead us into trial, but deliver us from the wicked one. Because yours is the reign and the power and the esteem forever. Amen. Now, normally when we say that, the Lord's Prayer, right, we stop right after the Amen, and then everything comes back to it. It's like, well, blah, 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 blah. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither shall your Father forgive your trespasses. That is another one that's going to challenge a paradigm box you have when you say, well, God forgave me, so now I'm free. And you go, well, it says right there, if you haven't forgiven somebody, that he's going to have a problem forgiving you. More paradigm problems. It's not as simple as you think. However, it is. Because if you look at it like a relationship, if you go back and look at this all as a relationship, then it has a different deal. Because then you start thinking about a relationship is the entirety of the relationship. I'll agree with the till death do us part on our Protestant vows, right? That it does. Death will release you from that vow. Okay. Not the vow for God. What do you do? You say, I'll follow you, God, and as soon as I'm dead, I'm good. Woohoo! No, I think that that takes us to the next step in writing it on our hearts and writing it on our minds. Okay. That lifelong relationship expects, if you want to be forgiven, you have to forgive. If you want to love, if you want to be loved, love. Honor God. He says he'll honor you. Love God and he loves you. That's a paradox, that he loves you even when you don't. Because I watch, I don't watch news. I don't. But little clips, snips you see people fighting and throwing things over barriers and banters and da 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 da. I was watching some protests over the European Soccer Super League protest, and they were at Manchester United, and the protesters on one side of the fence and the cops on the other side. And there's one point where they're throwing things. The protesters are, the cops. The barriers are meant to keep them back, and then they start to use the barriers as offensive weapons. So the cops grab the barriers and take them away. And you go, can you say you love the other side? And God does. So much so that he gave his son for the other side. The side that you might dislike, maybe even hate. And I think when you see him, when Mackie starts to talk about, he's with the castaways, those that they said they're beyond deal. And he said, no, I'm going to go talk to the tax collectors, the sex workers, as Mackie calls them. But he doesn't tell them, he doesn't say, oh, you're good people. He says, stop what you're doing and follow me. And I'll bring Torah to your heart. And beginning that relationship with me will eventually put Torah in your mind and in your heart. That's the start of that relationship. That's the start. Stop what you're doing. And then go into this relationship now, when you were looking and when you were dating other women, da da da, and then you get married and you have one wife, you don't get to do that anymore. You're now committed in this relationship. That's what you stay with. And that's what God expects. This is what you stay with. Because God said, I'm not going to leave you. And he didn't. And we'll get into that whole analogy and the dynamics of Judah and Israel, because the nation split into the nation of Judah and the nation of Israel, and then who got carried off for what and all those things. And that comes way down the road. And we'll talk about that, because that's a really good discussion as well. But I want us to think about something as simple, like he said, and he said, forgiveness natural. And I would think, buried deep down inside, it's so deep that it's going to take a renewal to pull that out of us, because were we wired that way? I believe so. I believe that's created in Eden. That's what we were created for and with. And we shoved it and stuffed it, like we compartmentalized and stuffed things down. We stuffed forgiveness away. We stuff forgiveness away. Not only do we not forgive others, we don't allow God to forgive us. And God says, I can do that. I got that. Just stay with me. Be in a relationship with me. We'll work through it. So we'll get into part 4 next week. The web links, everything's in the description for the clip again. Every time I watch this, I will forget. Every week I watch this again and again and again, and there's new things. And almost wish I could go back and talk about the other stuff. Go, oh, there's some stuff I should have brought and mentioned in episode 1, and then 2, and now we're 3, and we're going to get 4. Okay? I don't want to go and rehash stuff. There's too much new stuff to go on. But I hope that you get to go through and listen to those things too. Vimeo.com/TheDustyFeet or TheDustyFeet.com for all the info, all the information. what's going next week, all those things. And yeah, next week is part 4, and we'll roll on part 4, and we'll see how that plays out. But there's, again, more to unpack from here, and I'm really love this point. I really wish you could sit and talk together and bounce questions off, and that's kind of, because that's what I love about this stuff, when you can ask questions. And we have a men's group that I belong to, where we can go and we'll throw out an idea. I did it last night on a men's group, and it was interesting to hear the challenges of the paradigm that people had, and that really weren't comfortable in the paradigm deal, and what kind of said, okay, and then we'll move on. I said, okay, I get it. That the challenge, that how to handle that in the paradigms that we have stretches us. And what do we do? And that's what Dusty Feet's about. So thank you for being with us tonight. Looks like we were live because the feed is showing, so this is good. And next week, part 4, we'll do this again on the Dusty Feet.